Hail and well met. I am your humble scribe Amante, inviting you to join me in an act of lunatic daring do. Join me as we plunge down the rabbit hole of campaign setting creation and marvel at just how quickly this can completely change direction. So, this has been coming for a while. Actually, this has been coming since before Christmas, long before Christmas. And I'm actually kind of delighted to be starting it. Now, some of you are wondering, why is this episode 0? This is a big project for me, like huge. I don't think on YouTube I've ever done anything this big before, so there's a lot going into it. There's a lot going to be going into this and happening with this. So I decided it would be a good idea to have an outline video right at the start of the series to kind of give a rough idea of where we're going to go with this and what I wanted to actually encompass. Speaking of which, why exactly do I want to make a campaign setting? Well, the first one is I wanted to do something really creative on this channel. I love recording gameplay footage. I love recording random vlogs. But I also am a very creative person. I mean, I've made armor. I've written a book. I've written music. I'm generally speaking a very creative person. And I wanted something creative up on this channel. That's number one. Secondly, I've come to the realization I'm going to have to start running all my role-playing campaigns online, over the internet, because I'm at that age where people just don't have time to travel across a city to play for 2 or 3 hours of a role-playing game. They just don't. But they can probably put aside an hour or 2 hours a week or every fortnight to play over Skype, or whatever replaces Skype. So that's number two, and I wanted somewhere new and somewhere creative and uniquely mine to base those adventures in. And thirdly, I wanted to create something that would be in part a gift to my subscribers. This is going to be Creative Commons. And that means that you will be able to download a copy of it and use it to run your own games in. Free of charge. Now, that does mean that if someone was to turn around and say, like, say D20 were to turn around and say, we want to buy this setting from you, I can still do that. But anyone who has it from Creative Commons will still have it from Creative Commons. It's kind of complicated, but yeah, Creative Commons licensing is kind of weird and interesting, and I like it. It's cool. So I think starting off, I should probably explain what a campaign setting is. A campaign setting is a world in which to set adventures. That's it. Forgotten Realms is a campaign setting. Planescape is a campaign setting. The Vampire the Masquerade is a campaign setting. And if you want to break it down into something that everyone will understand, because I'm hoping that there'll be a couple of people watching this who aren't experienced in this. Strictly speaking, like the world of a video game is a campaign setting. It's a setting in which an adventure is set. It's that simple. So I guess we should start talking about what I want the setting to encompass. And ooh, flashy. I'm using new techniques. I do have some rough notes here, and we're just going to copy and paste them over because easy. Not lying. Easy is good. So I guess the first thing we should ask is, how do I get the campaign setting to fulfill what I want it to be? And really, I have a list of things here that I want it to be. First of all, I want it to have adaptable original races. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I want races that are less tied to specific archetypes and more flexible in that regards of how you want to play them. Now, obviously, there's going to be limitations because different races will have different physical attributes. But I want them to be at least somewhat adaptable, and I also want them to be unique and original. Sorry, folks. No humans. Or if there are, there'll be a tiny minority that won't really factor into the game as player characters. So, next we want... Come on. unique and original cultures. I have ideas for how I'm going to do this. A large part of it is going to definitely be things like making sure that if they are somewhat based on historical cultures, that they are twisted enough to actually be virtually unique. Think of it as a character creator in a video game where you start with an archetype and then you start changing it until it is its own thing entirely. Yeah, I know, video games. Somewhat realistic geography. This is a real bugbear of mine. I want there to be an explanation for the geography of the world in which we are going to be the geography of the world in which we're going to create. I want there to be, why are towns positioned in places? Why are cities positioned in specific places? What way do not just having points to represent mountains? That's not information. That's ridiculous. Not having rivers that flow against gravity. I've played in games where that happens. Yeah. Next, have a rational. That's really bad. Have a rational, even if only rationally irrational explanation for everything. What that means is that I want the internal rules of the universe to make sense within the universe. In other words, the physics within the universe has to be consistent, even if that consistency is just batshittery. This one's possibly controversial. No human characters. Player characters, anyway. We will go into this in detail in the future, but let's put it this way. I am very, very tired of games where humans just exist because humans exist. It's like, is there any real reasons for humans to exist in this world? No. Then why are they in this world? Or alternatively, there's many role-playing settings have a history of non-player races. For once, humans, at the very minimum, humans are going to be a non-player race. That's simple. Now, that said, if you're running a game in this universe in the future and you want humans to be there, you can do that. But I'm not. Next. Realistic political structures. No, Virginia, you won't get to talk to the king because you're a no one and he's a fucking king. Do I really have to explain that one? Look. Do you know anyone who is not a politician who can walk into the office of a president and talk to them? The answer is no. Political structures and interaction between the public and the political elite in role-playing settings is so often utterly unbelievable. I want to fix that. Next. Interesting, where possible, original monsters. Yeah. Now, when I say original, I don't necessarily mean have never existed before. What I mean is used at minimum in unique ways and interesting ways and original ways, or say using a particularly obscure type of dinosaur, for example, as the basis for an original monster. Nothing is truly original, but there's stuff you can do to make things certainly more original. And boy, is that a contradiction in terms. Anyway, and finally, make it usable in any role-playing system. This is a big one for me. Now, if you've been following my Stay a While series for a while, you know that I am a massive fan of GURPS. And there's a reason for that. I just love GURPS. I love it as a role-playing system. I love it for its flexibility. But more than anything else, I love it for how fun it is. It's a really fun system. But I also know that there are people, many people, in fact, who prefer a little something called AD&D. Although I think it's now called D&D again. There are people who like D20. There are people who like any number of role-playing systems. And I really, really, really disagree with campaign settings that are designed from the ground up to work only with one system. It pisses me off royally. We're not going to do that. We're going to create a world where if you want to run it with the most obscure role-playing system ever invented, you can do that with minimal tweaking. And that's the key. It's not going to be possible to make this absolutely universal out of the box, but it is possible to make it usable out of the box with minimal tweaking. That's a big part of it. Now, what do I want the series to cover? And by the way, this is most definitely subject to change. This is very subject to change because I honestly don't know where the series is exactly going to go, but I have a rough idea. Now, because it's only a rough idea, this could change quite a lot in the future. Anyway, to start with, I want to create a whole new world from whole cloth. In other words, this is not going to be a world based on being a parallel Earth. It's not going to be a world that you've ever come across before. It's going to be unique and original and its own thing. I want it to have a origin mythology that makes sense of the world and to the world, and also happens to be true. I want to cover basic map making, which is how does the world look. I want to cover less basic map making, as in why is this city here? Why is this river here? Does this mountain influence? What does this mountain influence? What do these hills influence? This forest, how dense is it? Things like that. It really needs to be done that way. I want to do what makes a village a village. Yeah, you could be very surprised by how many people don't stop to think about that, because you kind of need to have some degree of common sense when it comes to the structure of your villages and towns, but most especially your cities. Think about your country. How many cities are there actually? And I'm not saying, and I mean cities that fulfill the actual requirements to be classed as cities. Yeah. There are many definitions for a city. I tend to subscribe to the has a minimum of 2 out of several different public amenities, like say a cathedral and a university, or a university and a major library, or a library, or has one of those and has a city council which largely governs itself. So we're going to have to come up with a definition for all 3 places to live that works in this world. That's going to be fun. Create new player races. We are going to be doing a lot with that. I intend to create, starting out, at least 3 player races. And one is going to be partially based on... how to explain this? One is going to be based on a myth from our world. It's not elves. One is going to be an example of how you can take a fictional race that already exists and turn them into something new as inspiration, and turn that inspiration into something new and unique. And the last one is going to be, well, what if we create a culture based on a real world form of animal stroke species? So there's a lot to that. Adapting a historical culture. That should be A, not S. God damn it. Yeah. Here's the thing. A lot of people creating a new world are going to adapt an existing culture. That makes sense. It makes life easier for you. It's in some ways faster and more adaptable in its own way. It can be considerably easier, but there's a right and a wrong way to do it. I do want to go through how I personally do this and how it works when I do it. I also want to do creating new cultures, new cultures. God damn it, my grammar is shite. Creating new cultures from the ground up. That's the thing. Yeah, you can actually do it, and there are many wonderful examples of it in literature and in video games for that matter. So we're going to go and do that. We're going to go and create a entirely new culture from the ground up. Actually, probably several. Definitely 2. Probably more. Related to that, but actually somewhat separate to the culture. Traditions, taboos, and stigmas, or why we don't talk about Uncle Olaf. Just because you follow a particular tradition, taboo, or stigma doesn't mean it's necessarily a part of the culture in which you live or is an acknowledged part of the culture in which you live. This is one of those things that is tied to culture and is not tied to culture at the same time. Something we need to deal with. Oh, now we get to the really fun stuff. Well, fun for me at least. How do different cultures interact? This is really important, and the number of campaign settings I have played in that do not acknowledge it are crazy. Cultures interact differently with each other in unique ways. For example, the interaction between Ireland and the United Kingdom and America and the United Kingdom are markedly different. This is down to a combination of tradition, history, and culture. For all that to the outside eyes, the difference in culture between Ireland and England may be marginal. It's actually very pronounced if you come from within those cultures. And that's what I'm talking about. I want to go into I want to try and create an intercultural interaction between different cultures that makes sense, is believable, and also opens the way for fun and adventures. Next, political structures. You would be amazed at how many people will create a game setting where they start and stop at there's a king. That's nice. But who fulfills the king's orders? Which then leads into power structures. Power structures are not necessarily who's the king's right-hand man. Quite often they're tied back to traditions and taboos and stigmas. There's a lot goes into power structures, and one of the most important things that goes into creating both political structures, power structures, cultures, and taboos is the history of the world itself and the history of that culture or that section of that culture. And you don't have to necessarily create a great amount of detail into the sub histories within the overarching history of a culture, but it's a good idea to at least have a really solid core for off-the-cuff creation of new history that will make sense, because history rarely happens in isolation. Context is important, and interactions between those making the history and those experiencing the history are also important. So creating a really good fictional history for each region, even for towns, is important. Never mind the fact that you might have to create fictional histories for major NPCs. You're dealing with a king. How did the king come to power? Who was his predecessor and who was his predecessor? Why is the king in power and how does he hold on to power? All of that comes from history. Next, technology. Do they have the wheel? And before you say, of course they have the wheel, I'd like to point out that there were major Earth cultures, immense cultures, incredibly powerful cultures that did not have the wheel. Most of them are, I believe, in South and Mesoamerica. It can happen. And technology is also not uniform. You have technology that I guarantee you other people don't have in various parts of the world. So having that reflected in it is very important. Faith. How does faith work in this world? Is it relatively peaceful? Is it relatively violent? Does it have a direct physical manifestation in the world? In other words, like in Dungeons and Dragons, are there clerics? How powerful are clerics? What abilities do they have? Are there different types of clerics? Next, just how much input does faith have into the life of the average citizen of this world? It's all important, and it's all stuff that needs to be worked out. Magic. Now, I'm going to roll... This is separate. There is faith-based magic, and there is usually called occult magic, or, well, non-faith magic. I usually just think of it as occult magic. And again, is there magic? How powerful is it? What effects can it do? What is the social status of people who perform it? How common is it? All very important. Next, military. Now, this is technically part of power structures, but at the same time, militaries have their own unique cultures. Militaries have their own unique ways of... members of different militaries have their own unique ways of looking at the world and looking at situations. There's also a situation where, is the military in a region also its police force? That's an important question. Is the military actually strictly speaking a military? Is it actually in fact a section of the civil service? Is it more like the US National Guard in some ways, where they're sent into disaster zones, things like that? Important to figure out. Adds a lot of depth and breadth to the world, and adds a lot of potential for plot hooks. Again, important. Education. How common is education, and how high does it go? Just how important in this world is education seen to be? Are there universities? Are there even schools? What's the literacy rate? How many languages do people speak? And you would be very surprised in a historical context how often those do not actually line up. There were periods in history where people who couldn't write could speak multiple languages. Byzantium was a good example of that, in that pretty much everyone spoke Greek and their regional language. Unless, of course, the regional language happened to be Greek, in which case they probably spoke something else as well. It was by its nature a polyglot empire. But relatively few people in Byzantium were actually literate, beyond maybe being able to scratch their names. The two do not necessarily go hand in hand. And it's important to actually understand that. And it's important to figure out just how common education is and what forms it takes, because it's actually going to allow you, again, for plot hooks. It's going to allow you to add flavor and culture to the world. It's going to make the world more of a believable place. How to be consistently inconsistent and uneven, and the uneven nature of everything. Wealth is not even. Electricity is not even. It is within the system, but I mean, access to it. Access to clean water is not even. It is not evenly spread or evenly distributed. The world is built on inconsistencies, and in a role-playing setting, when you're creating a role-playing setting, you have to be consistent in what you're doing, including the inconsistencies. And that's one of the things we are going to cover in... It's pretty much going to be covered in depth, but it's not exactly going to have an episode of its own. It's just kind of something that's going to happen a lot of the time. And, of course, and a lot more I can't think of right now. Yeah, there is so much more that I haven't even thought of in this list. And I'm sure there's stuff that right now some of you are watching and screaming at the screen. You forgot. Comment down below. And this is going to be a big project. It's going to take a long time. There's going to be a lot that goes into it that might be somewhat surprising to people. I'm looking forward to it. I'm enthusiastic about this. I'm really excited to do it. And this is episode 0. This is just the overview. We haven't actually started at all. Not even a little bit. I don't even... Right now, I don't have an episode order because I kind of want the first episode in particular to be what it is. I'll start recording and what happens, happens. Although I'm actually quite certain when it comes to recording it, I will have a firm idea of what I'll be doing. Once this is started and once you have an idea of where it's going, I would invite you to put in your 2 cents, again, in the comments. If there's ideas you think would be interesting in the world as it's unfolding. Now, don't start throwing ideas at me right now because I know the core of the world. What I don't know is I know what the world itself will roughly look like. I know aspects of it, like core fundamental aspects of the world. Just like Earth has oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere, it has a certain percentage of landmass to water, it orbits at a mean distance of the year is however many days long. I kind of know that stuff already. That's the core fundamental stuff about this world. Once we have that down and you start to see what the shape the world is taking, feel free to put in ideas. I won't necessarily use them. I'm not going to lie. If I don't think an idea will fit in with where I'm aiming to go, I won't use it. But my intention is to occasionally post an extra video where I'll go through some of the suggestions and ideas that have been posted and explain to a degree, or at least in some degree of depth, why I've chosen to use or not use a particular idea. I don't intend to leave you just hanging out there going, what in the hell? Why didn't you even refer to what I came out with? So, yeah, I guess that's a good place to leave this today. And at least you now have an idea of where we're going with this. I have my work really, really laid out for me. I mean, this is huge. And the worst part is, there's aspects of this I'm still trying to figure out how in the hell I normally do it, because I just do this stuff on autopilot while I'm doing things. I've worked for the last 2 years on a setting for a webcomic. I've done very little of it consciously. It's mostly been just random thought while doing housework. It's how I work. So anyway, I'll be back again Saturday week with episode 1 of Let's Build a Campaign Setting. I hope you'll join me for it. In the meantime, have a great day, have a great week, have a great weekend. Be good, and bye for now.